Death Story.
Mortis Media. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Storytelling Channel. Tonight I have a scary story. Mysterious, creepy, strange, scary stories from cemeteries. I am also very happy to be the storyteller tonight. I hope to bring you an interesting story. Thank you. If you find this story interesting, please give me a like and share, so I have more motivation to make the latest videos. Now I will take you to this scary story, and don't forget to prepare yourself mentally when listening. Story 1. The Woman in Red, Chicago, Illinois, 1935. They say if you walk alone down the halls of the Red Bridge Hotel in Chicago past 3:11 a.m., you might hear the slow drag of a silk dress on the dusty floors, followed by the sound of something dripping. I've told this story many times, but it still makes my mouth dry. I've spent 5 years collecting the most unsettling tales, and The Woman in Red is one I'll never forget. In 1935, the Red Bridge Hotel was a lavish place for the city's elite. Among them was Evelyn Langford, a silent film star whose beauty was only rivaled by her intensity. She always wore red gowns, red lipstick, red heels. She said red kept the men afraid and fear kept them loyal. But one night she caught her fiancé, a wealthy businessman, with another woman. They said she didn't scream. She simply smiled, walked into the ballroom and slit her own throat in front of the guests. Wearing a gown so red, no one saw the blood until they stepped in it. From that day on, the hotel's red carpets were never truly clean. Staff began seeing bloody footprints that led to rooms with no guests. One maid opened the linen closet and found it drenched in red, sheets soaked, towels dripping, but when she blinked, everything was dry. Guests have reported hearing a woman weeping behind the mirrors, and some swear they've seen her, Evelyn, in her blood-stained red gown, whispering, "He never loved me," before vanishing. The hotel shut down in 1957, but people who live nearby say they still see a woman in red walking the halls through the broken windows. I've walked that building myself. I heard something dragging behind me. I ran. I don't go back. Some spirits scream, some beg. But Evelyn, she waits, drenched in blood, betrayed, and endlessly rehearsing the final scene she wrote for herself. Story 2. The Crimson Bride, Savannah, Georgia, 1889. They called her the Crimson Bride because her wedding gown was soaked in blood before the ceremony ever began. I've spent 5 years listening to horrors most would turn away from, but this one, it lingers. This story comes from Savannah, Georgia, a place already thick with ghost tales and southern decay. In 1889, Eleanor Whitmore was the daughter of a wealthy plantation owner. Known for her grace and fiery red hair, she was courted by many, but gave her heart to Thomas, a schoolteacher from the poorer quarter. Their love was forbidden. Her father, obsessed with legacy and control, arranged her marriage to a man twice her age, wealthy, cruel, and as lifeless as the portraits in their mansion. Eleanor begged, screamed, even tried to run away. But on the morning of her wedding, she was dragged from her room, dressed in a white gown that made her skin look ghostly pale. She never made it to the altar. Witnesses say the music had just started when screams echoed from the bridal suite. When they broke open the door, they found the groom dead, his throat torn, his eyes clawed, and Eleanor gone. Just gone. Some say she fled. Others whisper she was possessed, but that room 217, was never right again. Maids refused to clean it. Guests who stayed there spoke of bleeding mirrors, of a woman sobbing beneath the bed, of red handprints on the walls. One man claimed he woke with a wedding veil over his face and the taste of iron in his mouth. Most terrifying of all, at exactly 4:06 a.m., the time of the murder, the hallway fills with the smell of roses rotting in heat, and the distant sound of a string quartet begins to play a twisted version of the wedding march. Some who see her say she walks the halls still, dragging her blood-stained gown, her mouth moving as if reciting vows no one will ever hear. Others say she waits inside the mirror, appearing only to those whose hearts are unfaithful. The crimson bride was denied her love, and now she denies others peace. Her veil is soaked in blood, her voice is filled with vengeance, and she is still looking for a groom. Any groom. Story 3, The Woman in the Red Kimono by the Dried Well. Kyoto, Japan, 1931. In 1931, in a remote village near the forests of Kyoto, there lived a woman named Aiko. Her beauty was ethereal, so beautiful it unsettled those who saw her. Every market day, she appeared in a crimson kimono embroidered with black cherry blossoms, flowers of mourning. Aiko was betrothed to the village chief's son, but on their wedding day, he vanished. Blood was found smeared from the bridal room to the edge of a dried well in the forest. His body was never recovered. Only his blood-stained hairpin remained at the bottom of the well. The village elders, gripped by fear and superstition, accused Aiko of a blood ritual and hanged her beside the well. From that year forward, every anniversary of her death, villagers would hear ancient Kyoto songs echoing from the earth. Songs of betrayal, longing, and blood that wouldn't stop flowing. The village was eventually abandoned. But in 2006, a group of Tokyo students entered the ruins to film a horror documentary. Near the dried well, they found a crimson kimono hanging neatly on a willow tree. Yuji, one of the students, dared to wear it as a joke. That night, he awoke gasping, his chest icy cold. His roommate screamed. The marks of red handprints stretched across his torso as if someone were holding him from behind. The footage showed Yuji staring into a mirror and seeing a woman behind him. White eyes, blood-drenched mouth, kimono in shreds. They fled, but Yuji was never the same. He never spoke again. He only drew hundreds of images of a woman by the well, holding a blood-tipped hairpin, lips moving in one word, Urameshi. I resent you. Story 4, Scarlet's Room, Pennsylvania, 1976. In the quiet hills of rural Pennsylvania, 1976, there was an old Victorian house left abandoned after a fire consumed half of its west wing. Locals called it the Scarlet House, not because of its red walls, but because of Scarlett Jennings, a 22-year-old pianist who lived there with her fiancé, Thomas Mercer. She was radiant, always seen in crimson dresses, and known for her haunting love ballads that drifted out her window at night like ghostly lullabies. But the love between Scarlett and Thomas was not soft. It was obsessive, possessive, toxic. Thomas was a jealous man. He believed every look from a stranger was a betrayal. He installed locks inside their home, barred windows, and even nailed Scarlett's bedroom shut from the outside. He said it was for her safety. For weeks, no one saw her. Until one night, a neighbor reported hearing music again, but not on a piano. It sounded like a violin made of screams. When police broke in, they found Thomas hanged from the chandelier in the parlor, and Scarlett's room painted with blood. Not splattered, painted. Her sheet music was soaked, Her mirror cracked, but no body, just red handprints smeared across every surface like someone had tried to escape or invite someone in. Decades passed, but stories didn't stop. In 2003, a couple bought the property and restored it. Their 10-year-old daughter claimed her new imaginary friend was a woman in a red dress who cried at night and bled from her eyes. Their dog refused to enter the second floor. And every 14th of February, the walls of Scarlett's old room would sweat a thick, dark crimson fluid. Experts couldn't explain it. One paranormal investigator stayed overnight and was found the next morning inside the closet, fingernails torn off, eyes wide, lips chewed to the gum line. On the mirror, written in bloody script, were the words, "Love me forever," or "Die with me." Locals say Scarlett never left, that she became something darker. She was buried alive by love, and now she wants others to feel it. Women who sleep in that room report dreams of drowning in red silk. Men report waking up with lipstick kisses on their throats, but no one is around. Sometimes, late at night, you can still hear her song drifting from the cracked second-story window. It's beautiful, but if you listen too long, your heart might stop just to join hers. Story 5, The Red Wedding Veil, Savannah, Georgia, 1952. Savannah, Georgia, 1952. They say the river fog never lifts entirely here. It clings to your skin like sorrow that never dries. And in that fog, if you walk near the ruined Wilshire church after midnight, you might see her. A woman in a wedding dress, not white but stained red, standing by the broken altar, humming a tune no living person remembers. Her name was Mary Ann Weller, the daughter of a preacher and the most beautiful girl in town. She was engaged to Elias Crow, a wealthy man whose family ruled much of Savannah. To outsiders, they were the perfect couple, but secrets rotted beneath the surface. Elias had a lover in New Orleans, a woman scorned, pregnant, and betrayed. On the night of the wedding, she appeared in a torn red cloak, and something in Elias snapped. He whispered something to Mary Ann, took her hand, and led her out of the chapel. They never returned. 3 days later, the church was found burned to the ground. Elias's body lay beneath a fallen beam, neck snapped, holding a locket with Mary Ann's face. But Mary Ann was never found. Only her wedding veil remained, soaked in blood, caught on the pulpit, and warm to the touch. The veil would not rest. It showed up years later in an antique shop, then in a mailed package to her surviving sister, then wrapped around the neck of a honeymooning bride found dead in her bed, her eyes wide, her lips cracked from silent screaming. Anyone who touches the veil dreams the same dream. A burning church, footsteps echoing in ash, a voice whispering, "Do you still love me?" behind them. If they lie and say yes, they wake with red lace in their mouth, or worse, don't wake at all. The veil is now sealed in the Savannah Historical Society behind thick glass. But even the guards say it moves at night. Sometimes the veil floats, spins slowly in the air, as if dancing. And if you go to the Wilshire church ruins and leave something red, lipstick, ribbon, even blood, Mary Ann may come. Her skin is cracked like burnt porcelain, her eyes filled with a love that's long since decayed. She'll ask if you came to take her home. Don't lie. If you do, she'll follow you forever. Story 6. The Piano in Room 207, Charleston, South Carolina, 1966. They say the Magnolia Hotel in Charleston is haunted. not by rage, but by sorrow so deep, it folds time in half. On stormy nights, when the wind claws at the windows and the lights flicker like trembling hearts, guests on the second floor sometimes hear it. The soft sound of a piano echoing from room 207. But no one has stayed in that room since June 5th, 1966, the day Clara Whitfield died. Clara was a pianist, young, brilliant, and hopelessly in love. She met Thomas, a traveling violinist, during one of his performances in Charleston. Their connection was immediate, two souls bound not by flesh, but by music. He played with fire, she played with soul. Together they made beauty that moved people to tears. He promised he would come back. Every note he played in that room was a promise. Every kiss before he left was an anchor. But summer came and went, and Thomas never returned. He had died in a train accident in Missouri, but no one told Clara. She waited. Every day she sat at the piano in room 207, playing their melody. Her fingertips bled on the keys, her hair grayed too soon. She withered, waiting. And then one night she played their final piece, closed the piano lid, and never opened her eyes again. Her death was ruled a broken heart, but the hotel staff say they still hear the melody at night, soft, trembling, like a ghost trying to remember how to cry. Room 207 has been closed for decades, yet fresh fingerprints appear on the keys every morning. Guests who've stayed in rooms nearby have reported seeing a woman in a long red dress, staring out the window, hands hovering over an invisible piano. Some say Clara isn't angry. She's not a monster. She's just waiting, still playing, still hoping that Thomas might walk through the door one last time. And if you listen too closely, she might think you're him. She might ask you to stay forever. They say if you answer her music with silence, she leaves you alone. But if you hum along, she'll follow your melody, and you'll never be able to stop playing it again.
Story 7. The Red Veil Bride. The wedding that never happened, they call her the Red Veil Bride. And every June, someone reports seeing her standing on the steps of the long-abandoned Lacewood Chapel in Savannah, dressed in a crimson-stained wedding gown, her veil torn and fluttering like something drowning in the wind. She waits, face hidden, bouquet of withered black roses in her hands. The story goes back to 1952, when Evelyn Marlowe, daughter of a wealthy landowner, fell in love with Michael, a stable boy her family employed. Their romance was hidden, sweet, and dangerous. Evelyn's father had arranged her marriage to a banker's son, a man she didn't love. On the night before the wedding, Evelyn made a plan. She and Michael would elope at midnight and be married in secret inside Lacewood Chapel. But Michael never came. Evelyn waited in her wedding dress for hours. Lightning cracked the sky, her white gown soaked red from the storm. Some say it was rain, others say it wasn't. As dawn approached and hope left her body, Evelyn took the silk veil from her head, tied it around her neck, and hung herself from the rafters of the chapel, right above the altar where they were supposed to wed. The next morning, the town found her body still swaying, bouquet crushed in her hand, eyes open. But here's the thing, Michael didn't abandon her. He was found dead in the woods the same night, his skull caved in, a horseshoe embedded in his chest. Some say Evelyn's father discovered the plan and made sure the marriage never happened. Since then, the chapel has remained abandoned. But those who've dared go inside swear they hear whispers when they stand near the altar. Michael, you're late. You promised. If you go at midnight in June, you might see her still waiting, still hoping, still wearing the blood-soaked veil. They say if you interrupt her vigil by stepping too close, she will mistake you for the groom and the ceremony will begin. The doors will slam shut. The organ will play. The air will chill. And if you say, "I do," you'll never leave the chapel again. Story 8. The Crimson Dance. The girl who died on prom night. Everyone at Rosehill High still whispers about that prom night in 1997. They say you can hear the music if you drive past the school gym at midnight. An old record playing the same waltz over and over. But nobody dares go in, because she might be there. Miranda Tate, the girl in the crimson dress. Miranda wasn't popular. She was quiet, artistic, with long black hair and pale skin that made her look like a porcelain doll. Her only friend was Eli, a boy who loved her deeply, though she never returned his feelings. Instead, she fell for Daniel, the golden boy, football captain, already taken by the most popular girl in school. Miranda didn't care. She believed in fate, in signs, in dreams. She was convinced Daniel loved her in secret. So when prom night came, Miranda arrived alone, wearing a red dress she had sewn herself, a stunning, haunting thing that shimmered like fresh blood under the gym lights. She danced alone, circling the room, eyes locked on Daniel. People laughed. They pointed. Daniel ignored her. At 11:47 p.m., she approached him. She whispered something into his ear. He shoved her away. She stumbled, humiliated, and ran into the girls' bathroom. What happened next was never confirmed. Some say Eli followed her. Others say she was alone. But at exactly midnight, the lights flickered, the music stopped, and a scream shattered the air. They found her in the bathroom stall, her crimson dress soaked in her own blood. A broken piece of the mirror was still clutched in her hand. The words, "You will remember me," were scrawled in red on the walls. Prom was canceled forever after that. But she came back. The janitor saw her first, dancing alone in the dark gym 3 months later, the same song echoing from nowhere. Then a teacher found red footprints across the locker room floor. One student swore he saw her in the mirror behind him, mouthing the word "dance." They say every year on prom night, the gym doors creak open on their own. That same song plays. And if someone dances alone for too long, they feel a hand touch theirs. Cold, gentle, demanding. If you take her hand, you finish the dance, but you never leave the floor. Story 9. The Bride Beneath the Church. She was buried in her wedding dress. They say St. Eliza's Church is haunted, but not by a vengeful spirit or a demon, by a bride. A beautiful, forgotten bride who was never meant to die. In 1954, the church was preparing for the grandest wedding Savannah had ever seen. Isabelle Moreau, daughter of a wealthy French family, was to marry Thomas Redford, a war hero turned banker. The town adored them. Love in its purest form, people said. But no one knew Isabelle's secret. She was already pregnant. Not by Thomas, but by his younger brother, Caleb, a quiet poet she had met while Thomas was away at war. Their affair was brief, desperate, but real. Isabelle was torn, trapped between duty and passion. She chose security. She chose Thomas. The night before the wedding, she confessed everything in a tear-stained letter left on Thomas's dressing table. She never saw what he did after he read it. But the next morning, the guests arrived. The church bells rang. The organ played. Isabelle never came down the aisle. They said she vanished, fled out of shame. The family covered it up. But in 1997, during renovations of the church's foundation, workers found a sealed compartment beneath the altar. Inside was a bridal skeleton in a decaying wedding dress, her hands folded over her belly as if protecting a child. No one knows who sealed it, but some believe Thomas found her that morning. And rather than let scandal erupt, he ended it himself, silencing her beneath the church where they were to be wed. Since then, couples who try to marry at St. Eliza's often report strange events: blood-like stains on white dresses, cold fingers brushing their cheeks, whispers during vows. One bride claimed she saw a pale woman in red staring at her in the mirror before collapsing from a sudden nosebleed. Locals leave white lilies at the church steps every February 14th. The day Isabel was meant to marry, but she remains beneath the altar, in her dress, still waiting for a wedding that turned into a tomb. Story 10. She waits by the Crimson Lake, Vermont, 1962. They say Lake Morwen never reflects the moon the same way twice, and some nights, it doesn't reflect at all. Locals believe it's because of her, Margaret Holloway, the woman in red who still walks its misty banks, her gown dragging through the reeds, soaked in something darker than water. In 1962, Margaret was engaged to Elliot Kane, a young man whose family owned half the town. She was a schoolteacher, gentle and bright, with a laugh that could warm the coldest Vermont winter. They were in love deeply, recklessly. But the Kanes did not approve. Margaret was too plain, they said, too ordinary for a Kane. Elliot promised her he'd defy them, and when they could not be married in the church, he suggested something more romantic: a private wedding at Lake Morwen under a red full moon. Margaret thought it was beautiful. She wore her mother's blood-red dress, stitched from old velvet, believing it would be the perfect symbol of forbidden passion. But when she arrived at the lake, bouquet in hand, the wind howling like an omen, Elliot wasn't there. She waited, and waited, for hours, until the storm came. What no one knew was that Elliot had never intended to come. He had married another, arranged by his family in a quiet city hall ceremony that same morning. Margaret never returned home. Her body was found days later, face down in the lake, her red dress blooming around her like a dying flower, her throat torn open, not by a knife, but by her own hands. They said she screamed as she drowned, that the air around her curdled, that even the fish abandoned that part of the lake. Ever since then, strange things happen near Lake Morwen. Boats tip over in still water. Children go missing for hours, then return soaking wet, whispering about the red lady with sad eyes. Lovers who visit the lake often break up within days, haunted by vivid dreams of betrayal, drowning, and something brushing against their feet while they sleep. Some believe Margaret waits for Elliot still. Others think she no longer knows who she is, only that she was once promised love beneath a red moon, and all she received was silence. In 2007, a man named Graham Fessler tried to propose to his girlfriend on the very dock where Margaret once stood. When he pulled out the ring, the dock collapsed, not from rot, but from a sudden, violent pull below the water. His body was never recovered. Only the ring remained, left upright in the mud. They say if you walk by Lake Morwen on the night of a red full moon, you'll see her, Margaret Holloway, her face pale and wet, eyes sunken with longing, mouth silently forming the word why. And if you stare too long into the lake's still surface, your own reflection may begin to cry, even if you do not. Story 11. The Ghost Who Watched Me Sleep, Seattle, 1994. They told me the apartment on the 3rd floor of the old Brickmore building had been empty for years. No tenants stayed longer than a few months. The rent was cheap, and I had just moved to Seattle to start fresh after a bad breakup. The room had a large window overlooking the alley, creaky floorboards, and something else I didn't notice right away. The mirror in the bedroom was bolted to the wall, old and cloudy, refusing to reflect the light properly. I started hearing whispers at night, soft and longing, as though someone were repeating my name with their last breath. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a product of stress. But the dreams began, vivid, painful dreams about a woman with long black hair, sitting beside me while I slept, watching me with sorrowful eyes, brushing my cheek but never touching. Her name was Lydia. I learned that from the whispers. Lydia. Always Lydia. One night, I woke up at 3:12 a.m. to see her sitting at the foot of my bed, her face half-shadowed, tears of blood streaking down her cheeks. She looked heartbroken. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. And I felt, deep down, that she loved me. The next morning, I spoke to the old maintenance man. He said a woman named Lydia Carter had lived there with her fiancé in 1994. She had died in that very bed. Poisoned. Her fiancé had left her days before the wedding for someone else. She refused to eat, refused to leave the room. They found her lying on the sheets in her wedding dress, her hand clutching an empty bottle, the mirror beside her stained red with her final tears. Since then, tenants reported feeling watched as they slept, as if someone sat beside them, whispering not out of hate, but loneliness. That night, I returned and found red petals on my pillow. I live alone. The next night, I saw her again. This time, she whispered, "I don't want to hurt you. I just don't want to be alone." But when I tried to leave, she screamed, and every mirror in the apartment cracked. I stayed. For months, she would sing to me in the dark. Sometimes, I saw her smile, and I realized I was falling in love with something dead, with someone who would never leave me, even if I begged. I tried to move out, but the night before my lease ended, I woke up with her hand pressed against my chest, cold and trembling, and she whispered, "Please don't leave me like he did." Her hand was inside me, inside my chest. I felt her grief pour into me like liquid sorrow, like 1,000 years of being forgotten. I never left. I couldn't. And now, if you move into that apartment, you'll hear us both whispering. Because I still sleep there. And she still watches me. Story 12. The Red Scarf in Room 206. Colorado. 1981, the motel stood forgotten off Highway 50 in Colorado. Just a rusty neon sign flickering, vacancy, into the blackness. Room 206 was the only room that never got booked. Except by those who didn't know better. That was me. I was on the road, driving away from a life that had collapsed. The woman I loved had died a month before in a fire. They never found her body, only the scorched remains of her favorite red scarf clinging to a charred piece of wood like it refused to let go. I couldn't sleep the night I checked into room 206. The air felt heavy, not cold but pressing, like someone was holding their breath right beside me. The light in the bathroom flickered even though it was off, and the mirror kept fogging up. At exactly 2:11 a.m., I heard it, a whisper, soft and sweet, calling my name in her voice. It was Elise. Her voice, the same lilt, the same ache. I stood up, heart racing, and there, tied gently to the handle of the closet door, was a red scarf. It was hers. I knew it like I knew my own name. I opened the closet, and there was nothing but the smell of burned wood and roses. That's when I remembered what the motel owner had said earlier, half joking, half serious. If you're booked in 206, don't open the closet. And if you hear her voice, don't answer. But I had already answered. The next night, I stayed again. I couldn't help myself. I needed to see her. At 2:11 a.m., the scarf had moved, now draped across the bed. And in the fogged mirror, a message appeared, "I never left you." My breath caught in my throat. I cried. I talked to her, and she whispered back. Every night, we spoke more. About the fire. About how she wasn't supposed to die. About how she still loved me. And every night, I felt her getting closer. until one night I felt the mattress dip. I smelled her shampoo, and something icy brushed my hand. I turned, and for just a second, she was there. Half-burned, eyes weeping blood, but smiling like nothing ever changed. "You promised," she said, voice cracking. "You promised we'd never part." And then I saw them, dozens of red scarves hanging from the ceiling, swaying gently as if in a breeze that didn't exist. Each one belonged to someone like me. A lover. A soul who couldn't move on. Now I live in room 206. I don't check out. No one does. Because love, when scorched by grief, doesn't fade. It festers. It feeds. And in this room, it never dies. Story 13, The Last Dance in the Red Ballroom, Charleston, South Carolina, 1979. It was supposed to be their wedding night. The old manor in Charleston had been restored just in time. Candles flickered against the stained glass windows of the ballroom, casting warm shadows across red velvet drapes and polished floors. Anna twirled in her white dress beneath the chandelier, laughing as James poured them each a glass of champagne. The war had delayed their union, but now finally. They were husband and wife. But what they didn't know was that the house had once hosted a wedding that ended in bloodshed exactly 100 years earlier, and every anniversary since, someone was taken. At midnight, the music stopped. The air turned cold. James reached for Anna's hand, but she was no longer beside him. A red smear trailed across the ballroom floor toward the grand staircase. In place of Anna stood a woman in a crimson wedding gown, her face half skeletal, jaw trembling as if choking on a scream. She pointed to James. "You dance with death," she rasped. "Now death dances with her." James ran through the halls calling Anna's name. In every mirror, he saw her reflection, weeping, reaching for him, but never speaking. Her white gown soaked slowly in red, her lips mouthing the same word over and over. Why? They found James 3 days later, curled in the corner of the red ballroom, eyes wide open, his hand clenched around a single blood-stained slipper. Since then, every June 12th, the red ballroom lights flicker back to life. Music plays from no source. And if you enter at midnight, you may see a bride dancing alone. Her face twisted in longing, spinning slowly in a white dress that bleeds red with every step. But if you watch too long, you'll find her dancing closer. You'll hear her whisper your name. And the next morning, there'll be one more empty soul staring into the mirrors of that cursed manor. Story 14, The Red Wedding Dress in the Attic, Salem, Massachusetts, 1983. They should have burned it. When the Wilcox family bought the Victorian house on the edge of Salem, they knew it came with history, creaking floors, dusty furniture, and an attic full of relics no one had touched for decades. What they didn't expect was the red wedding dress. Folded neatly inside a rotting chest, it looked almost new, though the fabric shimmered more like fresh blood than silk. Their daughter, Claire, was the first to find it. She was 16, curious, and drawn to the dress like it whispered her name. That night, she tried it on. From the moment the bodice clung to her chest, something inside the house shifted. Mirrors clouded, clocks stopped ticking, and from the attic, music began to play, a haunting waltz that hadn't echoed there in 100 years. Her parents thought it was a prank, until Claire stopped speaking, stopped eating. All she did was stare into the attic mirror, murmuring something only the house could understand. They called in doctors, priests, even a medium. The old woman barely stepped inside before collapsing in terror. "She doesn't want to leave," she whispered before running out. She found her vessel. It wasn't until Mr. Wilcox pried the chest apart that they found the journal, its pages soaked in brown stains. It told the story of a bride-to-be, Eleanor Hartwell, who'd been left at the altar in 1883. Her lover never showed. Shamed, heartbroken, she wore the dress to her own funeral. Slit her wrists in the attic while the organ from the church echoed down the hill. Her final words, Written in crimson, "I will dance again." Claire vanished the next night. In the attic, the red dress hung in the mirror, swaying to music no one else could hear. But when they tried to remove it, the mirror cracked from the inside. A single line bled across its surface as though someone had pressed her finger into the glass until it split. Locals say on stormy nights you can still hear the waltz floating from the house on the hill. If you look into the attic window, you might see a figure spinning slowly, a young girl in a red dress, her face half yours, half someone long dead. If you hear her humming, leave immediately. If she looks at you, it's already too late.
15. The Crimson Violin, New Orleans, Louisiana. 1997, they say the violin still plays at night. No hands, no bow. Just sound drifting from the attic of the Beauregard mansion like a lullaby soaked in blood. The mansion, a crumbling relic from the 1800s, sat forgotten in the Garden District until a young violinist named Eleanor Moreau moved in. She was a prodigy, 23, fiery, brilliant, with a past shadowed by heartbreak. Her fiancé, Thomas, had drowned in the Mississippi under mysterious circumstances just a year prior. Elena claimed he never left her, that she could feel his presence every time she played, especially when she played the red violin. The instrument wasn't hers at first. She found it hidden beneath a floorboard in the attic, wrapped in lace and cobwebs. It was unlike any violin she had ever seen. Dark mahogany, strings like sinew, and a varnish so deep it looked as if it had been dipped in blood. From the first note she played, something awakened in the house. Lights flickered, paint peeled, and the portraits lining the walls began to weep black tears. But the music was divine. People came from miles away to hear her concerts. Critics called it otherworldly. Elena never explained how she played with such emotion, like her grief had possessed the strings themselves. One night, during a thunderstorm, a neighbor reported hearing two violins playing. One was Elena's. The other was deeper, slower, like someone crying through the strings. The house lit up with an unnatural red glow that bled through the windows. Then the music stopped, and Elena was gone. Police searched for weeks. No trace. The violin was found resting upright in the attic with a single crimson rose laid across it. The legend says she made a pact, that her grief, so raw and pure, called Thomas back, but not whole, not human. That they play together now every night, locked in an endless duet of sorrow and love. Visitors who pass the mansion swear they still hear it, the cry of strings from somewhere beyond life. Some say if you linger too long, you'll start to cry without knowing why. That something in the melody reaches inside you, tugs at every heartbreak you've buried. That the violin doesn't just play music, it plays your pain. Story 16, The Red Wedding Dress, Salem, Massachusetts, 1962. They say if you see a crimson veil fluttering on a windy night near the ruins of the Ashcroft estate, you must turn around and run. Because she's still waiting. Not for love, no, that died long ago, but for justice or maybe revenge. No one can really say. The story begins in 1962 with a girl named Liliana Cross, a dressmaker's daughter known for her pale skin, soft voice, and the haunting red wedding dress she stitched herself. She had fallen in love with a charming older man named Charles Ashcroft, heir to the old family fortune, and a man as cold as the marble statues that lined his family's estate. The town gossiped, of course. He was too rich, too private, too unnatural. But love makes blind fools of us all, and Liliana loved him deeply. He promised her a grand wedding, to be held on the estate lawn beneath a sea of lanterns. She worked for months on her dress, a stunning crimson silk gown, dyed with a special blend of imported flowers and berries, a color she claimed only looked red, but bled if you touched it too long. On the night of the wedding, guests arrived, but not the groom. The lanterns stayed dark. The estate was locked, and Liliana was found hanging from the grand oak tree at midnight, still in her red dress, the silk soaked through with blood not her own. Her eyes were wide open. Her lips were sewn shut. The authorities called it suicide. The townsfolk called it sacrifice. In the weeks that followed, strange things happened. The Ashcrofts vanished from Salem overnight. Their estate was left to rot, but the dress, it remained. People who entered the ruins sometimes found pieces of crimson silk fluttering between the trees. One boy who stole a scrap and wore it to a Halloween party was found days later in his bathtub, drowned in blood, though there were no wounds. A girl who tried to replicate the design went mad, claiming the stitches whispered in her sleep. Now, people believe Liliana never left, that she still wanders the estate in her red dress, face veiled, waiting for the man who never came. They say if she lifts her veil and you look into her eyes, you'll see the moment she died, and then you'll feel it. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the final snap of the noose. Some who've seen her have never spoken again. Others walk with a limp as if their legs had been broken and reset by unseen hands. They call her the Crimson Bride, and if you hear her humming on the wind, it's already too late. Story 17, The Red String Around Her Wrist, Savannah, Georgia, 1978. They say in Savannah, Georgia, love never dies, it only festers. That's what they whispered about the tragedy of Clara Mae Whitmore, a music student at the old conservatory downtown. She was quiet, always seen scribbling melodies in the margins of her textbooks, and always wearing the same deep crimson ribbon tied tightly around her left wrist. When asked about it, she'd say with a soft smile, "It's a promise. One he can't break, even in death." Clara Mae had fallen hopelessly in love with Adrian Holt, a violinist whose brilliance was only matched by his cruelty. He was older, mysterious, and known to play haunting nocturnes that made the air grow cold. Their romance was passionate but toxic, marked by obsession and twisted vows. She wrote him letters soaked in perfume and blood. He promised to never leave her. He said if he ever did, he'd die first. But he did leave her for another woman, a cellist from New York. And 1 week later, Adrian was found dead in his apartment, violin in hand, his throat slashed by a bowstring and a blood-red ribbon tied neatly around his wrist. The same ribbon Clara always wore. She vanished the next day. The conservatory closed for renovations shortly after, but students who dared sneak in swore they heard the sound of a violin weeping in the hallways, and sometimes a soft, feminine voice singing a lullaby in a language no one recognized. Years later, a new student named Ethan found Clara's old music journal tucked in the piano bench. Inside were notes, obsessive poems, and strange instructions. If he ever forgets me, the string will find him. It binds the soul. It drinks betrayal. Ethan laughed it off until he started dreaming of Clara Mae. In every dream, she stood at the foot of his bed, her face pale, eyes hollow, the red string now wrapped tightly around her neck. In one dream, she whispered, "He's not the last." When Ethan disappeared, all they found was his violin, strings torn, and a deep red ribbon tied around the neck of the instrument. Since then, no one has dared play in room 214. Because if you do and your heart has ever broken someone's, she might come for you too, with her red string soaked in centuries of love and revenge. Story 18. The Red Piano. Detroit, Michigan, 1963. They say the piano in room 3C of the old Oakshire Hotel hasn't played a note in over 50 years. At least not when anyone's watching. But if you listen closely at night, especially in February, around Valentine's Day, you might hear soft keystrokes, like someone playing a broken-hearted lullaby in a room no one checked into. They say the piano plays for her, for Eleanor Grayson, and the keys bleed. Eleanor was a lounge singer in 1963. She performed every weekend at the Oakshire, always in the same scarlet dress, her voice smooth like bourbon and sorrow. Every song she sang was for one man, Peter Alden, a traveling salesman who promised her the world. He brought her roses, whispered poems into her ear, told her that when he returned from Chicago, he'd marry her. But Peter never came back. Not to Eleanor. Not to Detroit. They say his car was found submerged in the frozen Detroit River, no sign of him inside. Heartbroken and convinced Peter had betrayed her, Eleanor's sorrow curdled into something darker. One night, after her last performance, she returned to room 3C, her favorite room, and locked the door from the inside. The next morning, guests complained of music. Sad, haunting notes echoing down the hall, accompanied by soft sobs. When hotel staff broke down the door, they found Eleanor slumped over the piano, blood seeping from her wrists onto the ivory keys. But there was no blood on the carpet, no wound on her body. Only the red piano crying. The hotel shut down shortly after, but every February, locals claim the lights on the third floor flicker back on. People passing by say they see a woman in red standing at the window, her mouth moving in silent song. And sometimes, if you press your ear to the front door, you can hear it, the same melody Eleanor played that night. Except now, the notes don't sound quite right. They drag. They moan. They bleed. One paranormal investigator who stayed overnight in room 3C claimed he recorded the piano playing by itself, and when he played the tape back, he heard a voice whisper, "He promised." Weeks later, that investigator vanished. The only trace of him was his recorder left on the piano bench and a faint smear of red across the keys. And so, the piano waits. It waits for someone to remember Eleanor Grayson. It waits for broken promises, because sometimes love doesn't fade. It rots, and it sings through keys that no longer belong to the living. Story 19. Scarlet Letters, Boston, Massachusetts, 1928. It began with a letter soaked in red ink, slipped under the door of room 412 at the old Avery Hotel in Boston. The letter was signed with handwriting that trembled on the page like the shaking hand of someone standing too close to the edge. It read, "You said you'd love me forever. Now forever begins." The man who received it, Jonathan Ellis, a reserved history professor, was found 2 days later hanging from the ceiling fan, his mouth sewn shut with red thread, and pages of a love journal scattered around him, all stained crimson. The police ruled it a suicide, though nothing explained the deep scratches on the walls or the way the mirror cracked inward from the inside. But that's not where the story ends, because that room, it still gets letters. Guests who've stayed in room 412 since then report waking up to envelopes on their pillows. Old paper, smelling of rose perfume and rust, each one containing messages in shaky script. "You belong to me now. I forgive you, Jonathan. You made me bleed for you." Some guests hear soft weeping from the closet. Others say they feel someone brushing their hair gently while they sleep. A few even claim to have seen her, the lady in red, with a veil soaked in something far too thick to be rain, floating above the bed, whispering, "Promise me again." A hotel maid once quit on the spot after finding a bloody handprint inside a locked drawer. Another staff member was institutionalized after claiming he saw red ink dripping from the chandelier like tears. Paranormal investigators have tried to debunk the story, but recordings from room 412 always turn to static at exactly 3:17 a.m. right when Jonathan is believed to have died. One audio tape caught a single phrase, over and over, "Beneath the hiss, you said forever." The lady in red is believed to be Eleanor Hartley, a poet whose heart Jonathan broke when he refused to marry her. She vanished in 1928, the same week he died. But her words linger like a curse. They say her final poem, written in her own blood, ended with this line, "My love is eternal." My grief, Red. If you ever find yourself in Boston and you happen upon the old Avery Hotel, think twice before checking into room 412. Because some promises dig so deep, they echo through walls, past death, dripping red forever. Story 20, Crimson Wedding, Charleston, South Carolina, 1933. Charleston is a city that bleeds beauty and history, but in 1933, something far more sinister stained its cobbled streets, a wedding soaked in blood. Whispered about even now as the Crimson Wedding. The story begins at an old southern manor just outside the city limits, where a young woman named Abigail Prescott was to marry the love of her life, a Navy officer named Thomas Everett. They were the perfect couple, so radiant that locals called them the sunrise pair. But that brightness didn't last. On the morning of their wedding, the sky turned an unnatural shade of gray. Guests whispered it was an omen, but no one dared to cancel. Abigail, dressed in a breathtaking gown of ivory lace and pearls, stood waiting at the altar. But Thomas never arrived. Hours passed. Then a telegram came, the sea took him. The ship is lost. Abigail didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply walked away from the altar and into the manor's rose garden. That night, she slit her wrists over a bed of red blooms, and legend says the roses have never turned white again. But that was only the beginning. To this day, the manor, now abandoned, hosts a phantom wedding every year on the anniversary. Locals report seeing flickering candlelight through broken windows, hearing faint strains of a violin playing a sorrowful waltz. People walking their dogs nearby claim their pets refuse to go past the gates, whining and backing away. Those who have entered the grounds say they've seen a ghostly bride wandering between the roses, her dress now stained deep red, her face obscured by a veil soaked in something far darker than rain. She doesn't scream, she doesn't speak. She simply stares long enough to make your breath freeze in your lungs. One couple who dared explore the garden at night reported seeing her kneeling among the thorn bushes, clutching a decayed bouquet and whispering, "Where is he?" He promised. Investigators have tried filming the grounds, but footage always distorts. One audio recorder caught a single phrase on repeat, "We were meant to be." A local priest once attempted to bless the land. He went blind in one eye the next morning, claiming he saw her watching him from the mirror as he prayed. Some believe Abigail never truly died, that her pain, her betrayal, was so powerful it birthed something beyond a spirit, something red. They say love is eternal, but grief is hungrier.
Story 21. The Red Room Above the Funeral Home, Detroit, Michigan, 1978. They say some places don't just house the dead, they feed on grief. In 1978, nestled in the crumbling streets of Detroit, There was a funeral home run by the DeWitt family. The business had been in the family for generations, and they lived in the rooms above it. On the top floor was a locked door painted crimson, a room that no one ever spoke of. It was called the Red Room. The youngest daughter, Emily DeWitt, was 17 when she fell in love with a boy named Marcus. He was poor, kind-hearted, and very much alive, which meant her father disapproved entirely. Mr. DeWitt had other plans for Emily. He wanted her to marry a fellow mortician's son and carry on the sacred trade. But love doesn't yield to legacy. One night, Emily and Marcus planned to run away, but her father found out. In a rage, he locked her inside the Red Room, saying she needed to reflect on her disobedience. Marcus never saw her again. Neither did anyone else. The funeral home continued to operate. People whispered that the Red Room sometimes glowed at night, that crying could be heard through the floorboards. The DeWitts claimed Emily had left for boarding school, but no letters came. No calls. Nothing. Just the silence of grief that soaked the building like embalming fluid. 10 years later, the home was sold. The new owners, unaware of its history, planned to renovate the top floor. When they broke open the locked red door, they found a mummified body in a wedding dress, sitting in a rocking chair, holding a faded photograph of a boy with Marcus carved into the frame. Her eyes were still open. Since then, the building has remained unsold. People who enter report sudden nosebleeds and the overwhelming scent of decaying roses. Mirrors fog from the inside. One visitor claimed to hear someone whisper, "It was supposed to be forever." And every Valentine's Day, a single red rose appears on the doorstep, no matter how many security cameras are watching. Story 22. The Red Veil Bride of Savannah. Savannah, Georgia, 1864. They still talk about her in the squares of Savannah, where the air always feels just a little too heavy in the summer and the oak trees droop like grieving mothers. In 1864, during the final years of the Civil War, there was a young woman named Annabelle Mercer who lived in one of the grand mansions on Whitaker Street. She was engaged to a Union officer, an arrangement that sparked whispers and scandal across the town. Her family was Confederate. Their blood ran gray, but love, as always, ignored flags and loyalties. The wedding was to take place on the first Sunday of October. Annabelle had sewn her own dress, a deep red silk gown, trimmed with black lace. It wasn't traditional, but nothing about their love had been. The morning of the wedding, word came. Her fiancé had been ambushed by Confederate deserters, hung from a pine tree outside town. He died with her name on his lips and a photograph of her sewn into his breast pocket. Annabelle locked herself in her room for 3 days. On the third night, neighbors saw her silhouette on the balcony, still wearing the red dress, her veil blowing in the humid wind. She whispered something, then jumped. They buried her in Bonaventure Cemetery, dressed in her red gown, but she never really stayed buried. To this day, tourists claim to see a woman in a red veil wandering through the cemetery just after dusk. Some say she hums an old Union tune. Others say she walks between the graves, looking for a name that no longer exists. A local tour guide swore she saw her reflection in a stone mausoleum and it blinked. One couple claims that, while taking wedding photos near the cemetery, Their camera captured a blurred figure behind them, a flash of red silk, a black veil, and a face twisted in grief. Locals say if you whisper Annabelle 3 times at night near Whitaker Street, you might hear a knock on your door. But whatever you do, don't answer. Story 23. Blood Moon Promise. Salem, Massachusetts, 1923. They say the blood moon was a curse the night Eleanor Whitaker made a promise she couldn't keep. Born in Salem, the town known for its witch trials and lingering shadows, Eleanor was a young woman with a heart full of love and a past full of secrets. She felt deeply for Thomas, a man marked by tragedy, whose family had been torn apart by suspicion and fear. On the night of the blood moon, Eleanor swore she would never leave Thomas, no matter the cost. But fate had other plans. Thomas disappeared the next day, found drowned in the dark waters of the Charles River. Eleanor's grief twisted into something dark and deep. She began to haunt the old Whitaker mansion, the place where they first kissed beneath the blood moon's crimson glow. Neighbors reported hearing her sobbing, a sound so filled with sorrow it chilled the bone. Soon, strange things began happening. Windows splattered with blood, red handprints on the walls, and a faint whisper that called Thomas's name through the howling wind. Legend says Eleanor's spirit waits for her lost love, bound by her promise, her veil stained red with the blood of heartbreak. They warn that anyone who visits on a blood moon might hear her cries and be cursed to carry her sorrow forever. Story 24. The Crimson Bride's Lament. New Orleans, Louisiana, 1897. In the dark alleys of New Orleans, where the humid air carries whispers of forgotten souls, the tale of the Crimson Bride is told in hushed, fearful tones. It is said that Lillian Dupree was a woman of unparalleled beauty and fierce love, promised to a man named Gabriel. Their love was passionate but forbidden. Gabriel was from a wealthy Creole family, while Lillian's roots were tangled in a past of slavery and sorrow. On the night before their wedding, an angry mob, fueled by jealousy and hatred, stormed the Dupree estate. Gabriel was brutally murdered in front of Lillian, his blood staining her pure white dress a vivid, horrifying red. Stricken by grief and rage, Lillian fled into the bayous, her heart shattered. But the darkness consumed her, twisting her soul into something far beyond human. They say her spirit returned, clad in a tattered crimson wedding gown soaked in blood, seeking vengeance for the love stolen from her. Visitors who dare to walk near the bayous at night report hearing Lillian's mournful cries, echoing through the cypress trees, mixing sorrow and rage in a haunting melody. They say her red veil floats in the mist, a symbol of undying love and wrath. Some have claimed to see her eyes, glowing a fierce, hellish red, burning with the pain of lost love. Those who cross her path feel an unbearable chill, as if her sorrow seeps into their very bones, a deep, endless longing that consumes the soul. One man, desperate to escape his loneliness, sought her out, hoping to free her from her torment. But instead he vanished, leaving behind only a blood-stained locket and whispers of a love so powerful it could curse the living. To this day, the Crimson Bride's Lament is a warning. Love torn apart by violence does not die quietly. It festers, it haunts, it consumes everything in its path. Story 24. The Crimson Bride's Lament. New Orleans, Louisiana, 1897. In the dark alleys of New Orleans, where the humid air carries whispers of forgotten souls, the tale of the Crimson Bride is told in hushed, fearful tones. It is said that Lillian Dupree was a woman of unparalleled beauty and fierce love, promised to a man named Gabriel. Their love was passionate but forbidden. Gabriel was from a wealthy Creole family, while Lillian's roots were tangled in a past of slavery and sorrow. On the night before their wedding, an angry mob, fueled by jealousy and hatred, stormed the Dupree estate. Gabriel was brutally murdered in front of Lillian, his blood staining her pure white dress a vivid, horrifying red. Stricken by grief and rage, Lillian fled into the bayous, her heart shattered. But the darkness consumed her, twisting her soul into something far beyond human. They say her spirit returned, clad in a tattered crimson wedding gown soaked in blood, seeking vengeance for the love stolen from her. Visitors who dare to walk near the bayous at night report hearing Lillian's mournful cries, echoing through the cypress trees, mixing sorrow and rage in a haunting melody. They say her red veil floats in the mist, a symbol of undying love and wrath. Some have claimed to see her eyes, glowing a fierce, hellish red, burning with the pain of lost love. Those who cross her path feel an unbearable chill, as if her sorrow seeps into their very bones, a deep, endless longing that consumes the soul. One man, desperate to escape his loneliness, sought her out, hoping to free her from her torment. But instead, he vanished, leaving behind only a blood-stained locket and whispers of a love so powerful it could curse the living. To this day, the Crimson Bride's lament is a warning. Love torn apart by violence does not die quietly. It festers, it haunts, it consumes everything in its path. Story 26. The Crimson Song of Eleanor, Charleston, South Carolina, 1887. Eleanor Hartley was the kind of woman whose presence could silence a room. Her beauty wasn't just in the shape of her face or the flow of her raven black hair. It was in her eyes, which shimmered with something tragic, something forgotten. Charleston was a city of southern charm, but the house at the edge of Magnolia Street, where Eleanor lived, held a darkness that neighbors whispered about but dared not confront. They said she had loved a man who died too young, Jonathan Blackwell, a pianist from New York, whose hands created music that made people weep. Their love was the kind poets never fully captured. He had proposed to her beneath the hanging moss of the old oak in the cemetery, with a crimson ribbon tied to the ring, red for passion, he had said. But before they could marry, Jonathan was found drowned in the Ashley River. The coroner said suicide. Eleanor never believed that. She stopped leaving the house after the funeral. Her music room, where he had once played her lullabies, remained locked. Then came the singing. People walking by would hear a woman's voice at midnight, humming a haunting tune, slow and trembling. Children would scream at the sight of a pale figure watching from the attic window. The ribbon, the red one Jonathan had used, was always there, tied to the doorknob of the front entrance, dripping wet, as if soaked in river water. No one knew who kept placing it there. 10 years passed. Families moved away. The Hartley house fell into disrepair, but the singing never stopped. Local teens dared each other to knock on the door, but most ran before their fists even touched the wood. One boy, Aaron, a skeptic, made a bet he'd spend a night inside. He never came back. Only his shoes were found, soaked in blood and river mud, resting neatly at the base of the piano. Then there was the diary, found years later by a city historian cleaning the house for restoration. In it, Eleanor wrote to Jonathan every day, begging him to return. Her last entry, written in blood, simply said, "If you will not come to me, I will go to you." Her body was never found. Some say she walked into the Ashley River with her crimson dress and the song on her lips. Others believe she never left the house. But here is the part that haunts even the most logical minds. The piano still plays. At exactly 12:17 a.m., the time Jonathan died, the melody returns. It starts soft, almost tender, then builds into something chaotic and rageful. A storm of keys slamming in anguish. A silhouette appears in the attic, swaying gently, as though dancing with someone invisible. Tourists sometimes stop by, snapping photos, not knowing the story. But if they listen closely, they can hear the song, and if they stay too long, they may feel a presence, cold, wet, and wrapped in sorrow, pressing against their chest. Many describe dreams of drowning. Some wake up choking. The house is now sealed by city order, but red ribbons still appear on the doorknob every so often. No one sees who places them. No one dares to touch them. Eleanor's love was eternal, but so was her grief. And in Charleston, when the fog rolls thick and the air smells of river water, her crimson song begins again. Story 27. Her blood painted the lake. Lake Crescent, Washington, 1913. They called her Marjorie Lorne, a schoolteacher from Port Angeles, who vanished without a trace on a winter night in 1913. Locals still speak of her with a tremble in their voices, not just because she disappeared, but because of what followed. Lake Crescent has always been deep and unnaturally still, its surface so calm that it reflects the sky like glass. But after Marjorie vanished, the lake began to weep. Fishermen spoke of red streaks appearing in the water at dawn, like blood seeping up from the lakebed. Birds no longer circled above, and the cabins nearby, once filled with laughter from visiting families, slowly emptied out. People said the lake no longer felt like water, it felt like skin. The story goes that Marjorie had fallen in love with a man named William Crane, a traveling preacher with a voice like honey and eyes that could make a woman forget herself. He arrived in town during a revival, preaching about salvation and purity, and Marjorie was captivated. But William had a secret: he was married. When Marjorie found out, she didn't scream. She simply smiled and said, "Let's take a walk by the lake." That was the last time anyone saw her. William left town the next morning, claimed she'd run off to Seattle. But a week later, his body was found. Not in the lake, but nailed to the cross at the old chapel, mouth sewn shut, eyes wide with horror, and a trail of bloody footprints leading to the water. No one ever confessed. The town sheriff said it was an act of God. The case was closed, but the locals whispered, "Marjorie did it." They say she drowned herself in the lake after killing him, her heart broken, her soul drenched in betrayal. But she didn't stay gone. Visitors started reporting seeing a woman in a red dress standing on the water's surface at dusk. her hair flowing in the wind, her eyes hollow with grief. Some hear her whispering to them, "Do you love him?" And if you lie, the lake answers, with screams, with drowning. More than one honeymoon couple disappeared from the cabins by the shore. Only the red handprints left on the windows remained. To this day, no one swims in Lake Crescent after dark. The rangers don't talk about the screams they hear, the sobs coming from the forest at midnight, or the figure walking across the lake when the moon is full. But they all lock their doors on February 17th, the day Marjorie vanished, because that's when the lake turns red again. And if you listen closely, you'll hear her voice, mournful and full of longing. Love me or drown. Story 28. The Red Wedding Veil. Charleston, South Carolina, 1926. They say her name was Annabelle Green, a socialite from one of Charleston's most prominent families. Her beauty was the kind that made people pause mid-sentence, her smile both enchanting and somehow sad. She was set to be married on a spring morning in 1926 to a man named Thomas Bellamy, a wealthy banker with charm and ambition. The wedding was the talk of the town, the kind of event where every detail was perfect, from the golden-trimmed invitations to the imported lilies from France. But the veil was red. No one knows why. Some said it was a family heirloom. Others whispered it was dyed that color by Annabelle herself, a symbol of passion or perhaps defiance. Her mother was said to have fainted upon seeing it. The church staff tried to convince her to change it, but she refused, calmly saying, "This is how love ends." On the day of the wedding, the church was packed. Annabelle walked the aisle slowly, the crimson veil trailing behind her like a river of blood. Thomas stood at the altar, pale and tense. Some say he looked at her not with love, but with fear. Just as the priest asked if anyone objected, the great stained glass window above them shattered. The sound was like a scream, and in the chaos Thomas collapsed, dead, a single red petal pressed against his heart, no wound, no blood. The veil had wrapped itself around his neck like a serpent. Annabelle vanished. The authorities searched the church, the grounds, the riverbanks nearby, nothing. Her body was never found. Only the red veil remained, draped over the altar, soaked with tears. Since then, the church has been abandoned. People who enter say they hear weeping, not loud, but right next to their ear. Sometimes they find red threads woven into their clothes, as if the veil has touched them. The pews are coated with dust, but always, there's a trail of footprints leading down the aisle in the exact pattern of a bridal procession. They say that every spring, on the anniversary of her wedding day, a woman in a red veil walks through Charleston's empty streets just before dawn. She stops before old houses, presses her hand to the windows and cries. They say she's looking for a groom who never loved her, or maybe one who betrayed her. Some believe she murdered him, that the veil was cursed. But others believe the veil wasn't red from cloth, but from blood, that she was already dead before she reached the altar, a ghost bride walking toward a final, eternal heartbreak. If you see a woman in red standing outside your window in the early morning mist, don't answer. Don't look into her eyes. And for the love of all that's holy, never say, "I do." Story 29. The Crimson Piano. New Orleans, Louisiana, 1954. The story begins in a crumbling mansion deep in the Garden District of New Orleans. The kind of house that breathes history and something else, something colder. Inside, at the center of the parlor, sat an old grand piano, its once white surface now stained a deep crimson, as if it had been soaking in blood for decades. The neighbors always wondered about the music that played itself from inside that abandoned house. Delicate waltzes late at night or broken, mournful sonatas in the rain. But no one ever dared go inside. Until Clara. She was a pianist, a student at Tulane, bright-eyed, soft-spoken, and always searching for something deeper in the music she played. One night, lured by the haunting melody drifting from the house, she followed it through the wrought iron gate, up the moss-covered steps, and into the heart of the mansion. She found the piano waiting, keys gleaming faintly despite the dust, and her fingers, as if possessed, fell onto the ivory. The song she played was not one she had learned. Came from somewhere else, somewhere older. A sorrowful, elegant piece that spoke of love, betrayal, and death. As the notes spilled into the air, the room darkened, and in the mirror above the fireplace, Clara saw her reflection, except the eyes were not hers. They were filled with longing, rage, and bloodlust. The piano belonged to Isabelle Laroque, a once famous jazz pianist from the 1920s who disappeared the night she found her lover, a trumpeter, with another woman. They say she slit her own wrists over the piano keys, staining them red, cursing the instrument with her final breath. Since then, the piano had played for no one until Clara. But Isabelle hadn't died alone. Her spirit remained, trapped in the song, aching for love, for revenge, for completion. As the days passed, Clara changed. Her music grew darker, more erratic. She began speaking in French, though she never learned it. She wrote letters to someone named Henri, and swore she could see someone watching her from the shadows. Her friends said she would disappear for hours, only to be found later sitting at the piano, fingers bleeding, playing that same damned piece again and again. One night, she didn't come home. Her roommate found her the next morning at the mansion, hunched over the piano, eyes open, glassy, dead. Her wrists were cut in the exact same fashion as Isabelle's. The coroner said there was no sign of a break-in.
No struggle.
Just the echo of music that hadn't stopped since. When they removed the piano from the house, it screamed. Not with wood, but with a woman's voice. It now sits locked in the back of a museum, sealed in glass, but every few weeks, the security guards hear it. A single note, then another, then the whole sonata. Locals say if you stand near it and close your eyes, you'll feel hands guiding yours, gently coaxing you to play. But if you play even a single key, your soul becomes part of the song, and Isabelle never stops playing. Story 30, Red Veil in the Mirror, Salem, Massachusetts, 1993. They said the mirror was cursed. No one knew who brought it to the antique shop on Essex Street. It arrived one rainy October morning, tall and ornate, with a dark mahogany frame carved into thorny vines. The shopkeeper, an old man named Jonah, didn't ask questions. Not until a crimson smear appeared on the mirror's surface 3 days later, shaped like a handprint. After that, he covered it with a black sheet. But people kept asking about it. especially her, Anna. She was 19, a college student at Salem State, majoring in art history. She was drawn to the mirror the way moths are drawn to flame. Every day after class, she returned to the shop and stood in front of the covered glass, asking to see it. Jonah warned her, said the mirror had a feeling about it, like a heartbeat beneath the glass. But Anna didn't listen. She was grieving. Her girlfriend, Lily, had died only 6 weeks earlier in a car accident. They had been together since high school, inseparable. Anna had been driving the night it happened. The guilt ate her alive. Maybe that was why she saw the red veil. The first time she saw it, the mirror was uncovered. Jonah had gone to the back room. Anna stepped closer and the surface shimmered. Not her reflection, but Lily's. Lily, wearing the red scarf she died in, her face pale, her eyes pleading. Anna screamed. Jonah rushed back and threw the cloth over the mirror. But the damage was done. Anna returned every night. She said the mirror whispered. She said Lily was trapped inside. She begged Jonah to let her take the mirror home. Finally, worn down, he agreed. The moment the mirror entered Anna's apartment, strange things began to happen. Water ran red. Candles lit themselves. And the mirror, it never showed her reflection again. Only Lily. First, Lily seemed lost, afraid. But each day she grew clearer, hungrier. She asked Anna to open the mirror, to bleed for her, to let her out. Anna did everything. Candles, rituals. She even carved Lily's name into her skin, over and over. Her friends noticed the changes. She was paler. Her eyes looked like they hadn't closed in days. She stopped going to class. When they visited, they heard weeping from the mirror. On Halloween night, Anna disappeared. All that was left was the mirror, and blood, on the floor, on the frame, and inside the glass. A second reflection, forever pressed against the cold interior, fingers splayed. A girl with a red veil and dead eyes. But it wasn't Lily. It was Anna. They say if you look into that mirror now, deep enough you can still see her, lips moving, whispering the name of the one she lost. But never, ever answer, because the mirror is still hungry.
Thank you everyone for listening until the end. If you find today's story interesting, don't forget to leave a like, a share, and follow me, so you don't miss the next scary stories. Wishing you all a peaceful night, and good night, if possible.